Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's great to see so many of you here. We're about to make a start. Thank you so much for your patience. It'd be great to get a sense of where everyone's zooming in from. So if you want to put your location in the chat function, that'd be really great. I'm based in London. My colleague Janice is in London too. And Joel's in Italy this evening and Louise is in Portugal. Ah, great. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We're about to make a start. We're just waiting for a few more people to log in. Lots of London people. Great. Great. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And thank you for joining us as we continue our series of online programming. So it is evening here in London. My name is Louise Benson, and I'm curator of talks and events at the Photographers Gallery. We're excited to be here with Joel Meyerowitz, who is joining us from Italy. As many of you may already know, Joel is an American photographer documenting everyday life and creating portrait and landscape images. Known for his early usage of color photography, he's here today to talk about the release of an expanded version of Wildflowers, which was initially published in 1983 and is now available with new images dating up to 2020. Tonight, Joel will talk us through a selection of photographs and the relationship of space and light to the motif of the flora as a photographic subject and ongoing speculation. Joining Joel is writer Louise Benson. Louise is deputy director of Elephant Magazine. She is also co-creator of independent publication Scenic Views and has also previously worked at Monocle and Vice, and she's zooming in from Portugal tonight. So in terms of format, we'll begin with a short presentation prepared by Joel, where he will take us through a selection of images used in his book. After his presentation and discussion with Louise, we will move to questions and comments from you using either the chat feature or the Zoom function that allows you to raise your hand electronically. We will then unmute you so you can speak. The event should last roughly 1 hour. Please note we are recording this, so if you do not wish to be featured, please turn off your camera. Also, we are offering 15% off Wildflowers, which is available in our bookshop now. This is accessible by applying the code Wildflowers15 during checkout. I'll share a link in the chat function and share also the code so that you can use it. The code is valid until next Wednesday. Lastly, we are approaching this event as we do all of our public programs, which is with the aim of creating a forum of trust and mutual respect, so please keep that in mind. I hope today's discussion inspires you, and we look forward to seeing you again here during more of our online activity, and even more, hopefully, in person again at the gallery, which will be opening later next month. Thank you for joining us, and now to Joel Meyerowitz.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Louisa, for that. I'm looking forward to having some fun this evening and do something spontaneous. But first, there's that picture. That's the cover of the book of Wildflowers that I think we should have a look at to start things rolling. You know, in the late 70s, I had just come back from a job. Louisa, just put up a single image instead of the group. Thanks. In the late 70s, I'd shot some job, commercial job, and I was editing the work. And during the course of the edit, a few pictures of flowers, not pretty flowers, but funny pictures of the way people wore clothing with flowers, or flowers played a role in the visual space. And because they weren't part of the shooting, I tossed them on the top of my light box. And by the end of the morning, I had 6 or 7 really strange pictures that had as their only connection flowers. And I thought, I bet you I have a lot of other flowers. So I went through my work for almost 2 days, thousands and thousands of slides. This is before computers, so it wasn't easy to have them visible in some other way. And by the end of those 2 days, I had almost 200, between 150 and 200 photographs in which the flower played some role. And I thought to myself, is it possible to make a book out of these disparate images that take place all over They look like a still life. They're on people's clothing. They're crawling up the sides of buildings. They're being crushed underfoot. Is it possible to make an interesting book using the flower as a provocation so that I would provoke myself to expand my vision and look at a subject that we think of as a cliche? Because it doesn't take much brains, I used to say, to make a picture of a flower. You put your camera close and it's a picture of the flower. Doesn't smell like the flower or anything, but it's a picture of it. But how can we use that cliche and take it apart and make a new way of looking at the world, or personally educating myself as to the way photography demands that we have interesting ideas and that we think through our projects so that they get richer and deeper and more a reflection of who we, the individual artist, is. Can we see the next picture, please? I'm not going to talk about all the pictures, but I just want to say that a picture like this comes out of a momentary impulse in which I thought, oh, she's in camouflage, because of the way the breath of yellow flowers just blows across the scene. And then that crazy dancing figure over her, Pan, in the forest. So an ordinary moment in a Parisian garden that isn't of much significance came alive because the elements there, the dancing fawn and the woman in camouflage, suddenly snapped an idea into my mind. Oh, this is possible. Next, please. So maybe just briefly through these are pictures in the book, older ones and newer ones. But in the briefest of moments, a funeral crosses your path. Do you go around it? Do you avoid it? Do you turn away from it? Or do you enter? And those are the questions that I might ask myself. But for me, I always go forward. I think the photography is a very optimistic way of looking at the world. And even though we're seeing something that's tragic to some other people, we're just bystanders to the scene. And the scene is like theatrical or movies or operatic. And there goes the coffin led by the red flowers. And just at the moment that I get there, those hands come out to shake at the same time as the two women are going to give a little kiss. This kind of observation, the temptation to be present so that when these things happen, you make a photograph of them. That's how I live. And I've always felt it's an incredible gift in my life to be able to spend my life out in the world, looking at things, trying to see where the mystery or the magic is hidden. Next.
Joel, I have a question for you on that note quickly, which is a simple one. It's just, don't you ever get nervous when you're out in the streets and you're in the throngs and you need to get that picture then, otherwise the moment will be gone? How does that feel in that second? Should I take it? Should I not take it? How do you overcome that?
I don't leave any room for doubt. When something comes to me visually in the streets, or when I anticipate, because there's a little bit of, it's like being an athlete. You hear the crack of the bat in baseball, and all the guys on the field know where to run. And the same with football or basketball. You're playing the entire game of seeing what's going on. And so when I'm on the street, I'm occupied being on the street and living in the moment. And when things start to manifest themselves in front of me and I recognize an opportunity, I move to it. I'm as graceful as I could be. I don't push anybody out of the way, but I try to get there within the fraction of a second that the thing might happen. And then I don't turn away. I stay with it, because when it happens, something happens afterward, and after that, and after that. So photography is a lot about a kind of wishful thinking projection forward. but it's a rising feeling. When I get that sense, I feel like I'm opening. And that's what's made photography so interesting for 60 years, is that the ideas that the street or the world generates are much more interesting than anything I could think of. So I'm going to accept these ideas by recognizing, that speaks to me. This connection is instantaneous. Next picture. Oh, I didn't talk about this, but it's self-evident what happened and how lucky I was. Next. You know, if you're a curious person, you go where something calls your interest. I had a Guggenheim Fellowship during the year I made this picture, and I was driving all around America looking at what I called leisure time, because the concept of leisure time came when the middle class was successful in the 60s and 70s. And people had the idea that they could retire and live the rest of their lives on their pensions, etc. And so the concept of leisure time arose, and I wanted to see how to photograph that in America. And so on one trip of mine out to the West, I heard, oh, there's going to be a boat launching today. And I thought, oh, I bet you there's a lot of people who are going there just to watch the boat, you know. And I went there, and what do I see? The captain of the boat and his wife and daughter are being presented with a giant anchor made of flowers in front of a white Christmas tree full of flowers. Anyway, it was so lunatic that I stood there and watched it. And I even watched her launch the boat. The admiral's wife launched the boat, and while Santa Claus was hanging from a scaffold in a little square of, basket. It's America. It's totally crazy. Next. Next. I think you can see how most of these pictures have something of the unexpected in them. And the subject matter is never really clear, because I don't really want it to be clear. I want to make the picture engaging, like life itself is engaging. We're looking everywhere when we're out on the street, because life is happening simultaneously for everybody. And so as a photographer, I like to be in places where things are coming together and falling apart in the moment, because the camera is the only instrument that can stop that, precisely that. So what you are recognizing is a moment's epiphany where something becomes meaningful to you, and you make a photograph of that. You don't just take its picture. You make a photograph by putting a frame around the elements of life that are the most exciting to you at that moment. And everything in them that they contain is there because you saw it happen. And I think that's what allows certain people to make challenging photographs. Because putting a person in the middle of a frame and taking their picture and calling it a portrait, it's been done for sure. But it's like the flower picture. It doesn't take any invention on the part of the artist. And if you're an artist, you want to invent your world using the materials that you find in it. All artists do this, no matter what. They use materials to make their visions come alive. We can talk about that later, Louise, don't you think?
Yeah.
Next, please. Next. See where the flower is so surprising? Oh, so here's something to consider. My best friend, well, one of my best friends, was the director of the Art Institute of Chicago and later of the Getty Foundation. And he had been visiting with me here in Italy. And then he went back to California and boom, he died. One of those things. He was young. And so I went to his funeral at sea. We were going to put the ashes in the bay, south of Boston, where he was born. And I was standing on the boat. There were two boats next to each other. I was standing on the boat as his brother has poured his ashes, and his daughter is throwing a flower, and his brother is kissing a flower. And these flowers were flying into the sea as a memory of this guy. And I remember standing there being so awed by the simplicity of the gestures and the ceremony of it. And I made this photograph, and this is just a few years ago. And it's touching to me, and I felt I had to have it in the book because it commemorates something that I witnessed that was tragic, but also was made beautiful for a moment. All the energies and sentiments of the people there created a kind of beautiful, crystallized moment of connection. Next. I made this photograph, and it's just a dumb picture. An old man with a bag, a bull in the window, and a dark space at his feet. And I remember thinking after I passed it, oh, I just saw Mythology. This is an ancient traveler who's traveled the world, and his burden is heavy, and he puts it down for a moment as he stands on the edge of the abyss. And he looks into the abyss thinking, is he going to survive? But above him, there's a spirit, a bull spirit, which is giving this dying bull on the street some lasting energy. And I thought, I must have read that myth someplace. It sounded like something from the Odyssey or any bit of Greek mythology. And sometimes on the streets of the world, you witness goddesses or gods or mythology coming alive right in front of you. These lessons they're there for all of us to play with our mind and see if something as simple as a flower could stimulate you to have ideas bigger than the flower.
Would you say that photography is a form of mythologizing when you frame that moment? A form of mythologizing?
Well, it is, yes. If the strike is right, its lightning strike is right and just, it will describe things of value to that human being. And if they're significant again and again, they'll be passed along on the stream of visual ideas. And people will say, oh, I see the world now a little differently because that artist made me consider something in a new way. So I think we do mythologize a moment by capturing it, by stilling it from the flow and recovering it from its passage. It then depends upon how potent the imagery is to drive other people's imaginations through the process of looking at the picture and reading what is the language of it. Because there's a language in there that the artist is trying to speak. I'm trying to tell you everything I'm saying in words. I'm telling you, I try to make in the picture. And if it satisfies me, then I recognize I've witnessed this thing. Whether it transmits itself to you is the challenge that the picture requires. I can't convince you of anything, nor is it my job. I'm talking about it here because we have a chance to be together. But in fact, I love sending the pictures out mute. They're in a book. There's no words under them. You have to look at them and think, oh, this is interesting, or this is shit, or this makes no sense, or this is funny. Or let's go to the next one and see what it does. and next, because I only have a few more minutes. Oh, that's lovely. Go to the next one right away so you could see the two in relation to each other.
Mm. So we're getting these moments of visual symmetry throughout the images that you've shown. How instinctive is that for you? Is it something that's followed you wherever you've photographed, or is it something that you only drew together later when arriving at this book and going over the archive?
You know, the question spans the answer in a way, which is it's everything. I mean, if I think that photography is about consciousness, that each of us who handles a camera, not just making a selfie, but handles a camera and looks at the world, is trying to align themselves with a kind of penetrating consciousness about the moment they're living in. And they want, when it comes clear to them, they want to wrest it from the movement and the flow of life and save it. And then by studying the works at home in your library or your archive, you begin to see that there is connective tissue, because it's your work. There's going to be layers of connective tissue, some of which actually fit together like that. Some bump and don't make it, and some just go like that. And you must ride the wave of confidence that gives you to go forward and follow your instinct, because that's all you have is your instinct. You come out the door in the morning, you go left or you go right. Whatever you choose is setting the course for the rest of your life. And then instinct, the first instinct is left or right. So you've already acted on it. And I use that from the minute I step out in the street with a camera in my hand till I return home. I'm on autopilot instinct. Whatever my instinct tells me to do, I do. Otherwise, why have instinct? We've survived as a species for 1 billion years because instinct was developed to survive. And we've honed it into skills about other things. But I think as a species, we have brilliant instinct, but we don't always use it. We let opinion override instinct.
Yeah, or
I try.
convention.
Next. Okay, so how long have I gone, Louisa? Can you tell me? Am I 20 minutes yet?
You're nearing that. Maybe like 5 minutes we can speed through.
Okay, I'll go fast. So look, everybody, all of you who have camera today have color. It's what you're given, and the world you live in is color. But in 1962, when I started shooting in color, and I didn't know anybody, any other photographers, but I met people. And after a while, I began to hear, oh, color is Amateurville, it's commercial, it's, about weddings and, news and commerce. And I thought, that's crazy. It's color. The world's in color. And in order to prove my point, in 1963, when I had a second camera, finally, I started carrying color in one and black and white in the other. Could we go to the next slide, please? And what I would do is, if the moment was just long enough that I could make the same picture twice, almost equally, then afterwards I could look at the pictures myself and decide why color. And this is before I had the kind of reasoning and vocabulary I have now about the medium. I was a kid. I was 24 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, or even I hadn't figured photography out. But I knew enough to say, if I'm going to have to defend color because I believe in it, then I better know what black and white does. Can we go to the next picture too? And so over the next few years, I made almost 200 pairings like this, in which I had a chance to study. And like, here's a picture. In the black and white side, it's the guy on a gray space, on a grayish day with a gray blimp overhead, and his shadow. And I like that the ring toss is in the shadow and just where it's supposed to be. But in the other picture, in the color picture, you see the various greens and the rosiness of that balloon-like belly of his. And then the Goodyear blimp is a killer for me, because look at the bottom of the blimp. It is reflecting the ocean below. So it is green, sea green. To me, color, if photography is about describing things, the content of what's in front of you, then color has an order of magnitude of description far more intense than black and white. So that was what I learned. And that description is everything. And I want when you look at that blimp and that guy's belly, I want you to pay attention to that sea green belly underneath there, because it's a surprise. Okay, why don't you just run through these like a couple of seconds each.
What gave you the confidence, Joel, at the time when people were decrying colour for you to take that forward and champion that?
The truth is, I didn't know any better. I was a kid. When you're 24, 25, 6, 7, like that, and you're beginning something, and you believe you've committed your life to this because of some passion that you can't quite describe yet, you just know you got to do it. That is so powerful that it carries one forward with a kind of momentum that is just unstoppable. You believe in yourself. And I thought, this is an old argument. The world is in color. I don't think in black and white. I don't see black and white. But I did learn to do that, because at some point I needed to see my prints in my hands. And in the early 60s, printing wasn't possible. Could you continue? No, don't go backwards anymore. Let's go forward into the other pictures just quickly so that everybody could see it, and then we could stop and Louise and I can have a talk. But just flip through them.
Well, the energy in these pictures, it's just the stuff
Okay,
of
stop.
everyday life.
Yeah, stop for a second. Just go back one. Just go back one to the color picture before that. You were saying, well, the energy.
There's so much movement in each picture.
There's movement, and there's because it's about energy. It's as if the subject, it's how you define the subject. You could say, oh, it's a horse that's fallen in the street, that's being pulled over in some way, and it's very dynamic. But it wasn't about the dead horse so much as about all of the human energy that had gathered around this vision. And as another human being, when I sense that kind of energy, I'm called to describe it photographically and try to put a frame around it, an interesting frame. I don't always want it to be in the center, because the things that happen on the sides are of incredible interest to me. I play everything out to the very edge of the frame. But I wanted to just pause here for a second, because here's a photograph that has its own energy. It's got a lot of stillness. But the energy that this has is what I would call ambiguity. The picture doesn't necessarily add up. It's not telling a story, but there's something about it that has potency And that comes from the ambiguity that we don't quite know what's going on. We can see everything and it's compelling, but like there's no way to explain it. So if something is compelling, but you can't explain it, to me, that moves it into the realm of the art of possibility, which is what photography deals with.
Something
Okay.
I observe as we look through many of these photographs, I'd say almost all of them, is that it's very rare to see someone in the image look to camera. How do you, having, you know, at times been very, very close up to those subjects, interact with them and in a way make yourself invisible and yet, you know, hyper present in, as you say, that control of the frame?
Well, that is one of those athletic skills that people who need to be on the street learn how to be invisible. And you'll see in the pictures, there's almost no one looking at me in any picture, especially if I'm close to them. I learned early on how to be up against people without bruising them or scaring them. I learned how to move and feint and dodge but very subtly, like a ballet dancer, truthfully, like a ballet dancer, to move in a way that's graceful and nearly invisible while you're accomplishing the thing that you want, which is to be present in the middle of the moment, but not disturb the moment, not change the moment by your being there. This is something that every serious street photographer, Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, Gary Winogrand, Lee Friedlander, that's what all of us practice as a way of staying in the game and functioning at as high a level as possible without someone saying, hey, don't take my picture. No one ever says that to me because of my method and my manner. I don't come across as threatening. I'm just a curious person who feels like I have a right to be exactly where I am, doing what I'm doing. I don't make apologies or anything, and I never ask anybody. I just do it and try to do it with as light a touch as possible while getting what it is that really interests me.
And the photographs in Wildflowers, you know, they span a very long time period in this latest edition. And I'm curious, you know, across those decades, has your experience of taking photographs changed? Have people changed over the years? I know you've spoken previously about you know, the advent of smartphones and people engaging with technology, with photography in a different way in more recent years. How has that, if at all, changed things for you?
Well, actually, the smartphone has disrupted life on the street from the human passage that it used to be. People went out on the street to get someplace, and on the way, they looked at everybody who was coming at them. They paid attention. They looked at their surroundings, the scope of the buildings, the way you move in the flow of the street. And they took pleasure in human behavior, like this picture here, a pair of shoes walking down the street, and a lady with a broken leg and crutches impulsively starts to dance with them. You couldn't write that in a script. And yet life does that. But if you're walking in today's streets and every other person or more has the phone up by their head, or they're tapping something out, or they're listening to something, they're closed off from the environment around them in ways that are a loss of our human experience as people, as nations. Something has been fractured, and I find it deeply sad, and you may not, because you're coming from this moment, but I come from another time. I've been on a spaceship getting here all this time. And what I've seen of the past had a very different human beat to it. And I treasure that. I really treasure it because it's lost now. And no one today will really know about it because they didn't have that. But I can see when people look at my photographs on Instagram, for example, they all talk about the streets. Look how people were dressed and how elegant they were. And look, no phones anywhere. People are talking to each other. And I'm thinking, wow, people in the present today look at that as a recent past with some desire. Pretty interesting comment about today.
Mm. That is very interesting, and I think, you know, conversely to that, however, in the book, and, you know, when you see these photographs from many different time periods together, I think you do still capture something that, you know, to look at the, you know, the way that the book is structured, you don't see the exact dates of each photograph until they're listed right at the back of the book, right? So I think, you know, there's an element of timelessness to them as well, despite having that kind of, you know, various timestamps hinted at through fashion, through clothing, or other elements in them. There is something universal that does cross even to, you know, I think the latest image in it is only from last year or the year before. There's an essence there.
Well, thank you for, I mean, I really appreciate the idea that of a universality to the pictures. At some point in time, they will look dated, you know, in the next, at the end of this century, they will look really dated. But right now, there's enough fluidity. And because my concentration isn't on fashion or on automobiles or on any of the other big giveaways, my interest is human nature and the behavior of people. I think that keeps it in a slightly contemporary feel. Here and there, we can spot certain trends. The pants leg is very wide, or there's lots of plaid, or the collars are real big. But it isn't the most important thing. And sometimes the retro quality makes it confusing and makes it fit to today. But really what it is it's more about who I am as a photographer. You're seeing into my method in a way. When you feel that universality, it's because I'm thinking in universals. The pictures I'm trying to make are about human behavior, which spans all kinds of ages. People do the same things over and over again. They, just the outfits change a little bit, but I'm not trying to do that. That's the way I respond as a human being in this moment I'm living in. So let me just make a pause here for a second, if I can. These pictures you can see are a different format and they look different. They're not dynamic in a street way. Those late street pictures that we just saw, they were an effort on my part to change the nature of my game from capturing an incident, like the woman with the crutches doing a kick up with the giant shoes. That's an incident that I photographed. That sort of does the whole work of the picture. But by trying to work exclusively in color and stepping back from the normal distance I worked at, I began to develop what I called field photographs, the deep space of Manhattan streets, so that all life, the buildings, the quality of the day, the people, the sidewalks, everything was part of the content. That pushed me towards the view camera and making these large format pictures because I wanted to get as much description as possible. And a 35 millimeter frame is a tiny little thing, whereas an 8x10 camera frame is actually 36 exposures. A roll of film is 80 square inches. And so the resolution of that would be, 36 times greater than one little tiny picture. And so I wanted, this is in 1976, I wanted to make prints that were 2 meters, 3 meters across. Nobody was doing it. And I thought, this camera is so clear that it allows for prints to go up that size and there's no grain, there's no interference between you and the image. And you know, I went to my galleries in New York and to the museums in New York, and I said, I want to make these big, and I showed some big prints. And they said, oh, nobody will buy those big prints. Nope, no, we don't have room in the gallery to show those big prints. I'm thinking, 1976, you know, color. I'm making prints that are that big, and people are saying, no, I got to sell only an 8x10 or an 11x14. And I'm thinking, what kind of crazy world? Painters then were painting canvases 30 feet across, you know? The photograph had to stay as this little piece of paper like this.
Mm.
So, you know, resistance wasn't only to color, it was also to scale.
Mm. It's in a way, when you blow it up to that size, it's a different form of immersion in the image. I would say, with the street photographs that you're doing prior to these much larger images, there's a different sense of immersion, even in the smallest of frames. And here you take some of those people and the spontaneity out of it, where you have to frame it and be more slow, careful with it, but you introduce a different form of immersion in the method of display.
Well, immersion is the absolute right word, because the painters that I knew and loved in America in the 60s and 70s were the big scale abstract expressionists who had, for 10, 15 years before that moment, had created these canvases. Think of a Rothko canvas where you walk into the space until it immerses you in color, so that your sensations are playing out to the side and you're in it. You're in the color field. And I thought photography, just like the world was in color and I wanted to photograph in color, photography didn't have to stay as a small piece of paper. Photography could be as big as an immersive experience with a Rothko. And by trying to offer that, I didn't get takers. It's like the whole photography art world back then didn't have any sense of scale. They only wanted to sell small things for a few $100s. And I was saying, this is a camera that is so sharp that it will make an image that at 9 feet, 12 feet, you can stand in front of it. You won't see any grain. You'll see people hundreds of yards away. They'll be this big and you'll see them. It's like it was opening up a dimension for photography. You know, photography deals with illusion, right? But it also is description. It takes the three-dimensional world and it makes it flat. So there's lots of things to play with inside of the photographic frame, just like art. But you need a scope to see them sometimes. Okay, so we should go on, because we have more to talk about, Louise and I, and then we have some questions from the audience, and like that.
Speaking of scale, you've produced many photo books over the years, which in itself is a very specific format, serializing, narrativizing, or drawing these quite intuitive connections. How do you approach that format when you embark on the next one, and what appeals to you specifically about the photo book as a medium?
Well, when I began in 1962, the only book I got, which was a gift, was Robert Frank's The Americans. And I remember, I didn't know anything about photography, but I remember paging through it and feeling the authority of it and the power of it. And I remember having that young feeling of, someday I want my work to be in a book too. Because the book seemed like the logical result of making photographs. A show goes up on the wall, but it goes away and people remember or don't remember it. But a book is fixed and it's at a size that you want, and it's at a print quality that feels right to you, and it's in an order that's fixed. And if you've made that order as deeply as you could, connected it in ways that were provocative, then that will be the lasting characteristic of the book. Every time I go to that Robert Frank book, I get not only the same message I got the first time, but I get new messages too, because that's how great a work of art The Americans is. And it's that way with many other books that I own, where you see the artistry at work. And so I've done that in all of my books. I've tried to find a rhythm, a visual, color, spatial, temporal elasticity that is all in play, so that if you page through 2, 3, 4 pictures, by the time you get to the 5th one, the first 4 will lock something as if they were building it for you without you knowing it. And when you get to that 5th picture, you suddenly recognize the energy that was leading you to it and taking you back now. Because it's like music that way. You know, you set things, tones up, and then finally you have a refrain. And then you repeat that refrain later on, but you do it in a slightly different way. But the theme comes back around. And you know, it's a big thing to hope for, and it doesn't always work, but it doesn't have to work as long as it convinces me when I'm making it that I've reached the final assortment. And usually it takes me 24 times to lay a book out and reconfigure it and move it through and feel its beat and its message and its scale and its momentum. It's like a living thing. It's like orchestral in some way. I know that may sound crazy because they're silent pictures, but the making of the linkages, part of the great fun is to think to yourself, I'm going to sustain this on this level and on this level and on this level, and then try to do it. It's like a tightrope walker. You could fall, but you also may run across it in an incredibly interesting way.
And I would say that's something, you know, across the many photo books that you've produced, some of which have a very intimate scale in terms of focusing on a single event or a single motif or broadening out across time and place. There's humor that links so many of your photographs, whether that's, as you showed earlier, a photograph of a funeral. You know, it's not humor per se, but there are these moments of unexpected connection. And yes, I guess at times, you know, there are moments that make you laugh. How do you relate to humor through your work?
So I grew up as a street kid in New York City, and it was an era that, you know, Charlie Chaplin and the silent movies, even though I was born in 1938, that stuff was around. And, you know, one went to the movies and saw 10 cartoons and 3 features in an afternoon. So we were all steeped in the language of cinema. Poor kids in the Bronx went to the movies, you know, before television. And so street humor, pratfalls and goofy things, the absurdities of ordinary life, that was part of a vocabulary that we had. We didn't have other distractions like television or anything. We got all of our stuff from the movies. And there were people like the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges, and, you know, who did ridiculous things to each other, constantly banging each other on the head. We thought that was funny. So I have to say that my sense of humor about the absurdity of human behavior, I learned at the movies and the cartoons when I was a kid. And, you know, I mean, look how pop art really came from the comic book, right? Andy Warhol came from the comic book and the newspaper. And so art often comes out of the most quotidian stimuli. And so I think my photography came, my sense of humor and my sense of the absurdity of life came from that. And then from watching it on the streets and then actually seeing, oh, this shit happens all the time. People are crazy. They will do the most ridiculous things. You can count on that. And so if you can count on it and you carry a camera, when it happens, you say, see, I told you so, click. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And yeah, it's a great reference, I guess. Yeah, your photographs that you've just shown are so cinematic. And speaking of popular culture, to bring it back to a little bit of what we talked about earlier in terms of today's culture and smartphones and so on, you have a very active following on Instagram. And I'm curious, we've talked a little bit as well about, we've heard about the various resistance that you faced at times throughout your career from the photography community and about what was an acceptable art form or not, elements of snobbery, we could say, or lack of understanding, at least. Would you say that there's anything that continues to be overlooked in contemporary photography, that it's still a battle to overcome? What is your relationship to Instagram today? And yeah, is there anything that you foresee as being an exciting future for the medium?
That's a very rich question, Louise. I could be here for an hour trying to put that one into all of its interesting, places. But the first thing I do want to say is thank you for saying something about the cinematic, energetic quality, the humor and the unexpected, because I don't feel that photography, at least my photography, is ever addressed with that kind of global understanding. People try to take a picture apart or a body of work, and I rarely find anybody getting the message that that's the field I'm playing in, that all of this stuff is part of what's so rich and enjoyable about the photographic method, is that many of these values, human values, physical values, are in play. Just like action painting required movement on the part of the artist to make the painting going across the painting. It wasn't about sitting still and going dot by dot.
Let's just wait a moment in case he comes back. Thanks everyone for your questions. We'll get to them in a couple of minutes. Hopefully Joel will be able to rejoin us. I'm going to send him a quick message. We'll just take a quick pause while we wait for Joel to come back on. But thanks everyone for your lovely comments and feedback and observations on what Joel has mentioned so far. Louise, maybe if you want to have a quick chance, give a moment to look.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at some great questions here. So yeah, it gives everyone a moment to have a think if they want to put one in the chat as well. We've got a few here, but yeah, definitely take a moment to think if there's anything that you'd like to ask Joel, because he has so many rich things to say.
We're going a little bit over, so I think we'll aim to finish at as long as Louise is okay to join us and Joel does, maybe for another 10 minutes or so. I'm just going to give Joel a quick ring.
Looks like he's re-entering.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but that's it. I flew away.
Glad to have you back.
Oh, thanks. Anyway, I don't remember where I was, but I wanted to, yes, I was thanking you for that. But now I forgot the rest of the question. I was so concerned about getting back on here.
Well, it largely related to resistance in contemporary photography. If you think there's anything that is still to come that might be on the horizon, that is still overlooked in relation to things like Instagram and which you're active on and so on.
You know, I never took it personal in my life. It just was, you know, ignorance on the part of people to see it from a new perspective. But as far as today, I think there's been a lessening of some standards. I'm not saying we have to make photographs that look like the past, not at all. We have to work with today. And there are a lot of really wonderful photographers out there doing things. But I think because the great wash of 1 billion photographs or more a day, washing over the planet like pollution, basically sweeping around in these streams on the internet is, and there's riches in there, there are riches in there that are remarkable. But at the same time, there's also a kind of averaging out that people seem to quote like. And that stuff is, it lowers the temperature. It doesn't get hot enough like real photographs do. They burn. Real photographs burn with a kind of inevitability. When you see one, you think, wow, that person was in the right place at the right time. They had a camera. Their senses were functioning. They even had an idea of something bigger than themselves, and they got it. That, to me, is a real unifying quality. And I think that this averaging, and I'm not saying anyone should stop, but I'm saying we have to be tougher, and photography will have to be tougher, because a lot of stuff that I see coming up as interesting, quote, photographs today is so boring. It's been done so many times. There's no invention. And art is about inventing a persona for yourself or for the medium that you work in, creating a voice. And if you don't have a distinctive voice, then you're going to be drowned out by those rarer distinctive voices. And I think, I don't know how to solve that. I don't think one will solve it, but I recognize it as an effect, which is whittling away at the higher capacities of photographic intelligence.
This relates to a few questions that are coming through actually in the chat, which there are several people who've asked what can a street photographer today or someone starting out do to distinguish themselves? And someone else has asked an interesting question, which is, how do you avoid doing a kind of standard composition and shoot looser, be more intuitive, as we discussed earlier? Where do you think that comes from, and how do you find it?
Well, know yourself should be a guiding principle for all of us. If you come to know yourself, then you'll actually hear the quietest questions, the deepest, most important, but quietest questions that your entire being is asking. And if you can actually get it, hear it, and then find a way of connecting to it through an art form, you might begin to have your own voice. And then your voice will be projected out there in a way that will make people want to hear what you have to say. Just look around you and see the voices that you listen to, whether it's a podcast or a book or a painter or a musician. There are voices that just come through more clearly than other voices. And until you find it, and until you accept that photography is about ideas, if your pictures don't have ideas, they're not going to be that interesting. And I had to learn that. I didn't have ideas when I began. I didn't even know how to recognize an idea. The only idea I recognized was I knew I needed to be a photographer and be out on the street. That's the only thing I knew. What came next was work. And what came after that was more work. And so somehow I got to here by asking interesting questions of the world with a camera and staying, pleasantly surprised by it and happy doing it and feeling, I really feel privileged. And, this is for all of you out there. Every one of you has the capacity to be an artist, a photographer artist. If you have a camera, you can figure it out. And it's a wonderful journey if you keep figuring it out and it keeps engaging you. And I'm doing it 59 years now, and it's still a provocation. It's still engaging and interesting and challenging. And every year something comes up for me that I didn't know I needed to know. And then I find a way to ask a question about it. And that's what keeps me going. And it's given me good energy and a feeling that this medium is so rich. I haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet.
Another question that we have. Another question that we have from the audience is with few people mentioning COVID and the changing experience of the street in the last year. So firstly, a question broadly just in terms of how you've dealt with that. And, we've mentioned energy throughout, the energy in the streets has completely disappeared in recent months and the last year. So what have you been photographing during that period? And then secondly, a question on similar to the approach you've taken with Wildflowers, looking at your more recent work from the last few years, have you noticed any other types of themes or commonalities emerging from that, whether that's in the last year or over a more extended period?
Well, they're both good questions. Forgot the first one already. No, it was.
What have you been photographing during COVID, and how has that changed your practice?
So I was in London when it went into lockdown. I had been in Italy, and I left Italy on the last flight out before they locked Italy down to be in London because my wife was going to be launching a book, her last novel. And we got to London, and all of the events that she had scheduled, the readings and publicity, were all canceled. And so we were in lockdown there. But fortunately, I was there for New Year's last year, and in 2020, I mean. And on New Year's Day, I asked myself, like I do every New Year's, what have I not done photographically? What have I overlooked? And on that day, January 1st, 2020, I thought, I really never made a self-portrait. In all of my life, I've made like 4, 5, 6, it's not something I did. I was too busy photographing other people. And I thought, at my age, at 83, what kind of challenge could it impose? What could I do with the self-portrait? I don't want to just do selfies. What can I do? How can I go about it? So I started to take some pictures. And each day, a different idea came up about it. And finally, I worked for the entire year, 365 days, and I have almost 4,000 self-portraits. And they're the craziest collection of pictures of me. And the reason is that on my Leica cameras, there's a 12-second timer. So you press the button and then you live your life, and 12 seconds later, the camera goes click. So I didn't have a chance to plan anything. If I was doing something in the kitchen and I suddenly thought, oh, I'm wearing an apron, this is going to look funny, I would set the camera up to look into the kitchen. I'd press the button, and then I'd go back chopping or frying or baking a cake or whatever I was doing. and the camera would take the picture. So it was like I had my own personal documentary photographer living with me for a year. And every once in a while, some crazy moment made itself funny or intriguing. And so now I'm editing those 4,000 rough pictures to see what does a year look like in my life, because I had to go out to empty streets. I had to spend more time in the house. And, it was quite amusing. I have to say, I had a good time doing it.
Did you shoot all of those pictures on film?
Not one. I'm a digital photographer.
No, we haven't got to that actually, and a lot of people here are asking what you shoot on today from the audience as well. And yeah, it's very interesting to hear your thoughts on digital versus obviously what you began on, which is analog film.
Yeah, film. Oh, I loved film too, especially 8x10 film, because it was spectacular. There's nothing like it until there was. And a number of years ago, when Leica came out with an S camera, they gave me one, and I made some pictures that were so astonishingly sharp that I decided to blow up a piece of one of them to 60 inches. And then I cut it out and I placed it on an analog print at 60 inches, same kind of subject matter. And I looked at the two of them through my loop, and I thought, there's no difference. There's no grain. It's as sharp at the edge as it is in the center. It's remarkably chromatic. What the hell am I using film for? If I can get the same thing in a handheld camera instead of in an 8x10 camera on a tripod, I'm all for quality. And so I committed to that. But I have to say, and this might be surprising to all of you, in 1999, the Japanese camera company made a handmade prototype and flew it to Boston and came over to Cape Cod, where I spent the summers, and asked me to use this little camera. The technician had to be there in case it fell apart. And for 2 days, I made pictures with it. The pictures were 1.8 megabytes each. So you know how big they are. However, they had atmosphere and color, and on the computer screen, they looked beautiful. And I thought, oh my God, if it looks this good at 1.8 megabytes, this is something that's going to take over photography. And so I started using it. And I'm probably the photographer who has shot digital the longest, because I started in 1999 and I've been shooting it steadily till now. And I have hundreds of thousands of digital pictures, tiny, tiny files to the biggest files. And that's a record. That's a record of a moment in photography's history that changed everything. Don't you think? It's like a turning point.
Absolutely. And I don't know if arguably there's still some resistance amongst the photography community, this idea of kind of purism of the analog, which again, I think, it's the future says otherwise, in the same way that you were proved right on color in particular. And as you describe, photography, it's still got a way to go in terms of it being accepted in a wider art world, in terms of the prizes it can command and the spaces it can occupy. But, we've come so far already.
Yeah. Well, it's a medium that, because it's so easy for everybody to use it and it's so universal, it often gets looked down on. I actually feel it's slipping right now in the art world, the place that it was rising into for the last 20 plus years, a kind of prominence and equality in the art world, it seems to me that either it was during this pandemic year or what, but it's slipping a little bit, I feel, which probably all to the good, because then those people who really aren't that interested in it will find other means of expression, and newer voices will come in and make their own kind of sense of it, recreate it in some way. But photography has always had these surges, though. I saw with my own eyes how suddenly the 19th century became a hotspot in the late 70s, and people started snapping up the whole of the 19th century for a song. And then, like 15 years later, they sell it for $10 million to the Getty or something like that. So there have always been speculators and people who recognize something new. And that's the cycle of art, right? Painting seems to be alive in crazy ways right now.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, major museums are building their photography collections and have been. The Tate has done huge amounts to expand their photography collection in the last 5 years, and that will show in the future in terms of the public shows that are allowed to happen.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, speaking of the Tate,
Yeah,
you did say, right, that those pictures that I showed earlier of the two, the black and white and the color, they are being collected by the Tate, and there'll be a big exhibition next year. It would have been this year, but it got canceled because of that. But I've just been in touch with the curator, who's flying back from New York, where he's been staying, and it's in the works. They'll be getting the acquisition in May. So next year, look for a big show, wide color, something like that.
That's great news. I'm sure a lot of the London audience here will be very excited.
Yeah, I hope so. I will be.
I can see a lot of positive feedback in the chat.
We may need to wrap up now. Do you have any final comments, Joel or Louise, before we do?
I'll leave it to Joel. Is there anything you'd like to close on, Joel?
A moment of silence falls over the guest as he wonders, what? Didn't I say it all already?
We have got a comment here saying time to write a memoir. And also a very nice comment saying you clearly hear a very young man in the mature man's body.
Yeah, well,
that energy.
Life offers you an opportunity to express yourself. And if you stay connected to that, that self is a very youthful thing that we all carry with us. It's a kind of basic energy. And I think that it doesn't matter the age of your body. If your spirit is up and playful and still engaged with the world, you're going to come through as being some, steady, like a steady state, like a pulse of something until you stop pulsing. Then you're gone. And I'm grateful for whatever it is in me that keeps me going like that.
It's that rhythm.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Joel and Louise. That was brilliant, and you've given us so much to think about. And I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get to all of your comments and questions, but I think given the number of people in the room, it would have been difficult, but we do appreciate it. And we were looking at it and reading it throughout. So we'll be sure to send that to Joel too, so that he can reflect on what you've said.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you to Joel Meyerowitz and to Louise Benson for your brilliant conversation tonight. Thank you, and for your insights, Joel, into your practice, and for sharing some additional thoughts into Wildflowers. Thank you to my colleague Janice McLaren and to Martin Steininger at TBG and to Clara Sufford and everyone at Damiani for your assistance in getting tonight off the ground. And lastly, to you all for your contributions today and your ongoing commitment to the gallery. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without you, so thank you. And at a time when we're unable to open our doors to you, we are grateful to be welcomed into your homes. It's been such a rich and thoughtful discussion. I was making notes trying to encapsulate it, but that's impossible. So hopefully you guys will just rewatch the recording. All of this is available for rewatching on our YouTube channel and on our event page, but I'll be sending an email tomorrow with more details about that. If you have a moment, we'd love to hear from you, and we'll be doing a quick poll at the end of this just to get some feedback. Anyway, I hope you're all okay, and please check our website for information on updates and forthcoming program, including our talk with Kensuke Koike in May. Thank you again, and hopefully see you soon at some of our online activity, and even more hopefully at the gallery soon. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Louise. I'll be in touch again soon. So yeah, have a good evening, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Really nice. Thank you.
Yeah, real pleasure, Joel. Thank you on behalf of everyone here.
Thanks, Louise. Let's maybe sometime, will you be back in London?
I will be, yeah.
So maybe sometime we'll get a chance to see each other in London face to face.
I'd love that. And we're in touch on email now, so I will be in touch.